In the last section, we explored conventional life estates, interest created by property owners to provide possession and use for the duration of a lifetime. In this section, we move into legal life estates, which differ because they arise automatically under state law rather than private agreement. The primary purpose of a legal life estate is to protect surviving family members from losing their homes or being disinherited upon the death of a spouse. These statutory estates ensure fairness and stability in situations involving death, debt, or inheritance. Legal life estates include three main categories: homestead, dower, and courtesy, and elective share. Each plays a unique role in preserving property rights within families. The homestead estate provides protection for a family's primary residence. Under homestead laws, a portion of a homeowner's equity in their principal residence is protected from certain creditors. This means that if a homeowner is sued for an unpaid credit card debt, the creditor cannot force the sale of the homestead to satisfy that debt. However, the homestead protection does not apply to debts directly connected to the property, such as mortgages, property taxes, or home improvement liens. For example, if a family lives in their homestead property and owes $15,000 in unpaid medical bills, the creditor generally cannot seize the home to satisfy that debt. But if the same family fails to pay their mortgage or property taxes, foreclosure may occur because those debts are secured by the property itself. To qualify, the home must be occupied as a primary residence, and in most states, both spouses must sign the deed to convey or mortgage homestead property. This law ensures that one spouse cannot sell or encumber the family home without the other's consent. Homestead rights usually last for the lifetime of the head of household and sometimes extend to minor children. Once the property is sold or abandoned, the protection ends. It's important not to confuse the homestead creditor exemption with the homestead tax exemption. The creditor exemption protects homeowners from losing their property due to certain unsecured debts, while the tax exemption reduces the taxable value of the home for property tax purposes. The second type of legal life estate is dower and courtesy, which historically granted surviving spouses rights in each other's real property. Dower gives a widow a life estate in her deceased husband's property, while courtesy gives a widower similar rights in his deceased wife's property. For example, if a husband owned land solely in his name, his wife might still claim a dower interest that allows her to live on the property until her death. This right exists even if the husband's will left the property to someone else. To convey property freely in states that still recognize dower and courtesy, both spouses must sign the deed. This release ensures that the buyer receives clear title, free of any spousal life estate claims. Although these doctrines have become rare, replaced by community property and elective share laws, they remain relevant in older deeds and legal descriptions. The third form of legal life estate is the elective share, which modernizes and simplifies spousal protection. Under elective share laws, a surviving spouse may claim a certain percentage of the deceased spouse's estate, even if the will attempts to leave them nothing. This prevents one spouse from completely disinheriting the other. For example, if a husband's will gives all his property to his adult children from a previous marriage, his surviving wife may invoke the elective share statute to claim the minimum percentage allowed by law, often 1/3 or 1/2 of the estate. The spouse must file the claim within a specific time after death. Otherwise, the right expires and the estate passes as the will directs. Elective share rights apply only to the surviving spouse and cannot be transferred or inherited by others. In summary, legal life estates serve to ensure that surviving family members have shelter and security when a spouse dies, even if the deceased's will or creditors would otherwise leave them with nothing. From this point, we transition from ownership estates to leasehold estates, which deal with possession rather than ownership. While a freehold estate represents ownership rights that may last indefinitely, a leasehold estate represents a tenant's temporary right to use and occupy property. A leasehold estate is created when a property owner, the lessor or landlord, grants possession and use of the property to another, the lessee or tenant, through a lease agreement. This gives the tenant a personal property interest in the real estate for a defined period. The lease specifies the terms of use, the length of possession, rent obligations, and the rights and duties of both landlord and tenant. For instance, consider Patrick, who leases a parcel of land for 15 years to build an auto repair shop. Even though Patrick does not own the land, he can construct permanent structures, run his business, and profit from it during his lease term because he holds a long-term leasehold estate. When the lease expires, however, Patrick's rights end, and the property, along with any improvements, reverts to the landlord. There are 4 main types of leasehold estates: estate for years, estate from period to period, estate at will, and estate at sufferance. An estate for years is a lease with a definite start and end date. It automatically terminates at the end of the term without notice. For example, if a tenant signs a 5-year lease from January 1st, 2025 to December 31st, 2029, the lease ends automatically on that date. An estate from period to period or periodic tenancy renews automatically at the end of each rental period unless proper notice is given. A month-to-month lease is the most common example. An estate at will has no fixed term and continues as long as both parties consent. Either party can terminate it at any time, and it ends automatically upon the death of the landlord or tenant. Finally, an estate at sufferance occurs when a tenant remains in possession after the lease expires without the landlord's consent. If the landlord accepts rent, it may convert into a periodic tenancy. If not, the tenant becomes a trespasser subject to eviction. Review summary. A legal life estate is created by law to safeguard the property rights of surviving family members. The homestead estate protects a family's primary residence from most unsecured creditors. Dower and courtesy give a surviving spouse a life estate in the deceased spouse's property, while the elective share allows a surviving spouse to claim a minimum share of the estate regardless of the will. In contrast, leasehold estates arise from leases and grant tenants the right to possess and use property for a specified time without ownership. The 4 main leasehold estates, estate for years, estate from period to period, estate at will, and estate at sufferance, determine how long a tenant may lawfully occupy a property and under what conditions the tenancy ends. Discussion. Why are legal life estates important for family protection? Answer. They ensure that surviving spouses and dependents retain housing and a fair share of the estate, even if debts or wills would otherwise exclude them. How does a homestead estate differ from the homestead tax exemption? Answer. The homestead estate protects against certain creditor claims, while the tax exemption reduces the taxable value of the property. What distinguishes a leasehold estate from a freehold estate? Answer. A leasehold estate provides possession for a limited time without ownership, while a freehold estate includes ownership and indefinite duration. What happens when a tenant remains after the lease expires without permission? Answer. The tenant becomes a holdover tenant under an estate at sufferance, and the landlord may either accept rent, creating a periodic tenancy, or initiate eviction. Closing remarks. Legal life estates and leasehold estates illustrate 2 very different ways people hold rights in land, one based on statutory protection and inheritance, the other on contractual possession. Both exist to balance fairness, security, and lawful control of property. Understanding how these estates operate is vital for real estate professionals because they affect title transfers, leasing agreements, and to convey clear ownership. By mastering these distinctions, you gain insight into how property rights are preserved, shared, and limited under the law.